Okay, welcome guys. As you can read, this is a remake of choosing the right college and getting in is the title of the telecast or the webcast. The agenda will be the following. What you should look for in a college, very important. What colleges are looking for in a student. Now, believe it or not, they're also searching for good students as you are searching for good universities. Then we'll discuss admissions criteria. There are two types of criteria, objective and subjective. We'll talk about both. And sometimes these can be confusing. So we'll actually give you examples of some students who actually made it. That is the walk the talk slides, where we'll show you a little brief on a few students from different curricula. And then what can 12th graders or what should 12th graders do at this point, followed by what can 11th graders do, and a frequently asked questions slide, and then questions. There were 4 or 5 questions asked yesterday, and I will answer those in this recording as well. So let's get started. What you must look for in a college. This is from a student perspective. The major or subject you would like to pursue. Very important because a specific major or concentration may not be available at the schools you're looking at. When I say school, I do mean college or university. Okay, so that is something you must verify before you go ahead and make your plan. A dual degree, and you may have heard this term, is not the same as a double major. So double major is entirely up to you. So you can enroll as a major in CS, for example, and then also get a major in data science or statistics, for example, which is not that uncommon, but do realize it's very, very difficult to do a double major. The dual degree means the program itself is constructed in such a way that in 4 years you get a dual degree in 2 different disciplines. Now, what about employment after graduation? Very critical for international students who are not US citizens or permanent residents. For you, this becomes even more critical because the STEM majors afford you 2 advantages. One is you get a training visa for 3 years as opposed to 1 year. And then the other advantage, obviously, is the technology world is exploding in terms of employment opportunities and all that. Regardless of what you may have heard about some people finding it difficult to find employment in the United States, it's still true that the market is doing well. But in your case, right, even if you're in 12th grade, we're talking about 5 years from now. So there's going to be a lot of changes, especially in technology, etc. So don't worry too much about it, but do realize that the STEM major gives you 2 advantages. One is the 3-year training visa, which is employment training, and then followed by the fact that the STEM majors afford you good employment opportunities, because essentially that is where the technology companies are looking for STEM majors. Okay. Now, second consideration should be the size and location of the college. So where is the college located? Because the access can be important for one thing, because small companies who come for recruiting, they may not be able to have the resources to come all the way to a location where it's not very easily accessible. Okay, that's one advantage that a location might have, but that's not everything. But that is one of the things you must consider. And the size of the university is also important, because the size of the university. So if you talk about a large university, we're thinking perhaps maybe, 20, 30,000 students, and that's a large campus, right? So there, lot of majors take very, very similar classes. In fact, all majors have to take some common courses. So there, the class size may end up being as many as 400 to 500 students. Now, in a small college, where the entire student body consists of, let's say, 2,000, 3,000, sometimes 4,000 students, that class size may come down to 50 or maybe 30. And then as you go up in your journey, so you become a sophomore, then a junior, the class size becomes even smaller, right? So in big universities, it may become 80 or so. And in very small universities or colleges, I should say, that number could be as small as 10. So that is important in terms of size. So where would you thrive? Would it be a large university with a lot of, sports activity, a lot of events, etc.? Or would you be happy in a smaller college, taking those reasons into account that I had just mentioned? Location, access can make a big difference. We just talked about that. Now, what about cost of attendance? Those of your parents are probably wondering, how much is this going to cost? There are two things to keep in mind here. So one is a private university, the other one is a public university, which is a state university, if you will. The private university charges everybody the same. The fee is exactly the same no matter who you are. International student, local US citizen, if you live in the same state as the university is located, it doesn't matter. You pay the same fee. The public universities, there is a little catch here. They end up charging much less to the residents of that state. Now, when I say resident, I just don't mean somebody living in the state, but you have to be classified as a resident. It's a little involved in that sense. So we'll not go into details, but most of you are going from here, even the US citizens, unless your parents have managed to somehow maintain residency, and there is a way to do that, of course, legally. Otherwise, you'll be paying the same as out of state or out of country fees in the public universities as well. Okay, so that cost we generally say is about $60,000 US for both private and public, although there are some private universities in particular that charge as much as $75,000 or $80,000 a year. So that's a personal choice you have to make. All right. Now, there are some ways to reduce the financial cost to you. Okay, the easiest and the most common one is the scholarship. The scholarship is completely based on your resume, what you present to the university, right? So if they really want you, then they'll give you scholarship, sometimes as much as $30,000 US, or, very rarely, but it does happen even in top schools. We've had students that got a full scholarship. Okay, now that is the most common one, whether you're a citizen or not. Now the second one, the FAFSA, is a fees only for US citizens or permanent residents, and there are some other qualifications in the middle, but that's not applicable to most of you. If not, yeah, like I said, if you're not a US citizen, it's not going to work. Okay, so colleges use the information from the FAFSA to make decisions on scholarship. Okay, so colleges know that you're applying to multiple universities and colleges. So what they will do is they'll sweeten the pot and say, okay, we'll give you $10,000 a year, maybe $20,000 a year, something like that. Sometimes as little as $5,000 a year can make the difference. And the second one, the CSS profile, you can also fill out for those universities who are participating in this. Okay, so that is slightly more involved than the FAFSA, but the financial aid comes from the college itself directly, only from the college. So they set aside some money. So they want to make sure they're doing the right thing and giving the aid to the right people. So the colleges will use that. The third category is much smaller in terms of the amount that you get, but this is where typically, right, the colleges may have set aside some funds based on some donations from alumni that will say specifically these funds should be used for this purpose. So those scholarships are very small in nature, maybe as little as 1,000 per semester, or sometimes it could be 5,000 a year or something like that. But there'll be some criteria you have to meet and continue to meet to maintain that scholarship. Okay. Now we looked at what you guys should look for in a college. Now, how about what colleges are looking for? Believe me when I say colleges are actually clamoring for good students. Now, why does this happen? It happens because it's not a question of just getting in. You have to also get out. So the graduation success rate, meaning 100 people are going in, but only 30 people are going out, is not a good reflection on the university or college. Okay. So they have to do due diligence as well. And another reason is there is no, I mean, black and white like a entrance exam that India is so used to, right? There's entrance exam for everything in India. So in the US and other countries, Western countries, UK, Canada, Australia, there is no entrance exam, right? So they have to look at many categories of information that you provide. So they have to do a lot of filtering, which they do, to understand will the student succeed in college, because they want the graduation rate to be higher, much higher than 50%. Okay, so it's very important for you to understand they're also looking for good students, just as you guys are looking for a good university. Okay, let's move on. Now, what are the college admissions criteria? Let me go over this in a little bit of detail here, because it's important for you to understand. The most important criterion is the academics. Academics meaning for the US in particular, you have to provide your grades from 9th, 10th, 11th, and your predicted score for the 12th. Okay, now I keep saying US because most of the demand, most of the students coming to us require US admissions, as per US admissions. Okay, so it's important for you to know that you have to provide 9th, 10th, 11th grades along with the predicted score for the 12th grade. Okay, and then advanced placements we're also putting under the same category, because since the subject SATs have gone away, if you don't know what subject SATs are, then don't worry about it. The advanced placements are college level courses that students take when they're still in high school, to show the colleges that, look, I'm ready for college. Okay, they come for various subjects like math, economics, history, etc., psychology as well. Now you can also take college level courses, whether online or in person, doesn't matter. So these also count under the one category we labeled academics, and that is the most important category. Now remember, academics meaning 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades are mandatory, but the other two, as you see, advanced placements and college courses are not mandatory, but a lot of kids do that. Okay. Then the SAT or ACT. Now SAT is the one that's really going very popular in India. We get very few opportunities to do ACT, unfortunately or fortunately, it doesn't matter. But SAT is the more popular one, and most kids are doing that, especially with the new format where the SAT test is shorter and perhaps somewhat easier, but students are still getting used to the digital format. Okay. Now, the NMSQT stands for National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, and that only applies to US citizens or US, green card holders or residents in that sense. So it doesn't apply to others. So if you're not one of those, then don't worry about it. In Olympiads, not a requirement, but some kids do that. So we put it in there. Okay. Now, next comes things like research, internships, paid jobs. All these are somewhat of a challenge for Indian students. So students are studying in India, but it is possible. Uwezo actually has ways for you to do research online as well. And we have done that for a number of students. And sometimes you can be lucky to get an internship, and we can also do that, but not so often. But there are ways to get around that. Okay, paid jobs are very difficult to come by, because in India, the internship itself, a student intern means you've already finished your undergrad. So that is a problem for everybody, not just any one student. Okay. Now, this category is called leadership and empathy, is very important. This entails everything that you do outside the classroom. Okay. So community service, showing empathy, as you see there, solving a problem, showing passion for your subject, for your major, or anything else that you do outside the classroom that does not come with a score. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay. That is called the leadership and empathy category. Perhaps this category is the one that is most critical, and I will explain why in the next slide or two. Okay. Now, the last, but one of the most important categories right there up with the leadership and empathy is writing world-class essays, meaning in the US in particular, you will submit anywhere from 12 to as many as 20 essays on different prompts, but they also give you the word size. Okay. Then There's no limit on how much time you can spend writing the essay, but you have to adhere to the word limit, okay? And they have to be world class in the sense you have to articulate what you have done and your journey through, depending on the prompt, right? Journey through high school, or doing a particular project or doing a particular service, etc. Okay, so these are the criteria, and then I'll go a little bit more into what separates some students from the rest. Okay, so I'll explain to you the criteria. Remember, I mentioned earlier that there are two types of criteria: objective criteria and subjective criteria. Okay, objective criteria are like academics, SAT, APs, college courses, Olympiads. So in general, objective criteria means anything that comes with a score that can be measured. So if I can look at SAT score of 4 or 5 students and say, oh yeah, this is the top and this is the bottom, whatever, right? So the objective criteria means they all come with a score. Okay. Now subjective criteria are the ones that do not come with a score. Okay. So how do you measure somebody going off into some remote village and then, let's say building homes for the poor? I'm just giving you not so random example. We have students who have done that, something like that, right? So you can't really put a score to it, but these are the most critical because for the same reason that you cannot put a score on it, colleges look at what have you shown through that. Have you shown passion, compassion, problem solving, creativity, leadership, etc. So these are very important criteria to keep in mind. Okay. One example I frequently give to parents and students is, let's take a student who's spent time every Sunday going to the temple and serving food to the poor. Okay. So that's great. You're a young 15, 16-year-old kid that's taking time out to go to the temple every Sunday and then doing something which is obviously a service. Now, another student, this actually happened with us. One of our students took the same problem, right, but wrote an app that put together on the one side, restaurants, etc., that have, excess food, not leftovers, but excess food. And on the other hand, he integrated the application with food shelters. So the food shelters can say, we need, this much of this or whatever. And then the app will match that. And then he also figured out the logistics of getting the food from point A to point B. Now, you tell me which one shows more motivation, leadership, commitment, and problem solving ability. And now, unfortunately, that is what it is, right? Even though both are service, colleges are looking for something different. So just keep that in mind. Well, it's mandatory to have high scores, right? The objective criteria, I told you before, right? So we're looking for kids. Now, I should not say we. Colleges are looking for students typically who have good scores, good SAT scores, and other objective criteria, but also have done well in subjective criteria, because that's what you would be doing again in college. You'll not only go to classes and do homework and do projects, you'll be participating in a lot of programs outside of the classroom. You'll be doing community service. You may belong to a coding club or economics club or a business club or a debate club. So that's why they're looking for evidence that you've already done that here. Okay. Now, one of the problems is academic scores from different curricula are presented to universities. So parents and students spend way too much time saying, should I convert this to some type of US or the target country's format score or something? So the answer is no. You don't have to do that. Those colleges and universities are well aware of CBSE, the state syllabus, the Cambridge syllabus, IB, of course, because it is international, right? But you don't have to do that. They don't really compare like that. And in fact, in the US, the problem is even more pronounced because they don't really have a national, like a CBSE type thing, because every school district, which consists of, few schools, or even within that district, one school might have a different kind of, more stringent grading methodology than other schools. So don't worry about that too much. SAT, on the other hand, is a standardized test. It's easy to evaluate. Now, what tips the scale or the subjective criteria? Okay, in that slide I showed you with the picture of the cards and stuff, I'm sure you gathered, if you want to be different, right? Colleges are looking for that one red Ferrari, the one red car among a bunch of white cars. So you must do well. It's a requirement, mandatory that you do well. Whatever well means to some people, it might mean 90% above. In some cases, it could be 80% above, but the kind of colleges and kind of universities will vary, and Uwezo can take care of that in terms of what are the target universities. But it's not only one criterion that makes a decision, not just your academics, not just your SAT, okay, not just because you've done 3 or 4 APs, right? So it's a combination of all these things. So there is some subjectivity built into the process, which for the most part works to your advantage. Okay. Now, but what tips the scale, as it says here, right? So competing against thousands of kids applying from India, and then 3 times as many from China, and then from other continents around the world. And then US itself is a large country with hundreds and thousands of students vying for the same top 30, top 40 universities where Uwezo is a key player. So how do they evaluate when you don't have an entrance exam? So that's where the objective criteria, while mandatory that you do well, did not sufficient to get into a top 30, top 40 university. Okay. So that's where the subjective criteria come into play. Universities often ask, okay, I like this course, but what have you done outside the 4 walls of the classroom? Literally, that's what they ask, right? The higher the ranking of the university. Now, by the way, USO does not believe in this ranking system of, oh, these are the top 10, top 15, whatever. We believe that there is a college or a set of colleges or universities or schools, like I call them, for every student, and it's different set of universities and colleges, okay? Depending on your scores, depending on your SAT, depending on the subjective criteria, as well as your own personal requirements. Sometimes, as I said, location based on family requirements, or you might say, I want somewhere I can do, I don't in a big city. Why you're saying that? Even though a lot of Indians or Asians are kind of tied down with this ranking system, at Uwezo we say choose the right student, right university or set of universities that he or she can go to. Okay, that's important for you to know. Now we've been talking about objective and subjective criteria, right? So let's walk the talk, right? So let's show you a few slides of Uwezo students who have actually done well. And what did they do? We just highlight some things about them. Okay, so the number one, this is not in any order, by the way. So here's Pranay, CBSE, scores of 90% plus. So great, academics are fine. SAT 1510, took 2 APs, and that really beefs up his resume, right? And then he and 2 others, developed an app to connect donors to NGOs for any item to be donated. Okay. Typically, if I have to donate 3 different types of items, maybe books, and then maybe furniture, and maybe something else, I have to work with different NGOs to do that because one NGO does not do it all. So what these kids have done, the group of 3 have, developed an app where on the one hand, I can log in, I can say I want to donate all these things, right? And then it'll match with the NGOs who need those things, who are working with underprivileged kids, for example. So this was a very nice effort by him along with other kids. He also developed an app for tracking post-treatment progress for leukemia patients, okay? And then for community service, did a lot of work in a native remote village. So that shows his commitment, and the fact is, taking live under conditions which are not the best, right? So he was rewarded with an acceptance from UIUC in computer science. Now, speaking of rankings, I just said that before, right? So UIUC may rank not so high in general as a university, but their computer science department program ranks pretty high. I would say it competes with any of the other top 20. Something to keep in mind when you're choosing colleges. Second student, Shaker. Now he was IB student, got a full score 42 in IB, SAT 1550, took a couple of APs also. By the way, kids that do IBDP program do not typically take advanced placement because the HLs in your program, the HLs you're pursuing are considered equal to APs. Okay, but you have to get a certain score most of the time in the actual board exam, not the predicted score. In the actual board exam, you must score a 5 or sometimes a 6, depending on the university, to get college credit and be recognized for it. Okay, so typically they don't do it, but again, he did it. He took 2 more than required, right? That's what makes you a different candidate from the others. Okay, and then he was basically a science and kind of a science geek. He had a science lab at home. He was a fanatic. He did different things to show passion for physics and chemistry and wrote about that in his essays. And one of his big achievements was a project called MedBand, or a product you can call it. So it's a wearable. One would wear this device on his or her arm, for example. So it was to help patients, Alzheimer's patients, people suffering from memory loss to remember. Okay, he led a 3-member team. They used 3D printing and they integrated software and hardware to do this, which took about 4 or 5 months, literally. But this was a standout project because some people in outside commercial companies expressed some interest in talking to the students, but they were not interested because they don't have time to do that, obviously, right? So that just goes to show you that, leading and showing innovation and showing, this is showing service through technology. That also works in both ways, creativity, technology, as well as community service. But for service, he did work with differently abled kids. And then he helped 10th graders write the board exam who could not write on their own. Right now, that doesn't mean he wrote for them in terms of knowledge, but they might have dictated to him or some other ways he found to help kids write exams. That's also something different. So he got into UC Berkeley and he's pursuing engineering physics. Okay, let's move on. Then there's Alekia, state board student, okay, 98%, SAT 1560. Now she took a gap year because her SAT was around 1420 or 1430 or something before she came to Uwezo, and she improved to 1560 academics. She already had a 98% overall, and she showed passion for physics and related technologies or subjects because her interest was aerospace engineering from get-go. And then she took several online, offline courses, wrote about them in her essays. And then Olympiad, she was ranked at the national level in math and science Olympiads. Very good. Community service, drove several initiatives in and outside school. And she earned the tag of a model student, right? Which, of course, in the recommendation letters, the schools would write about that. And then she got into Duke University, again, one of the top whatever. I'm just going to say top 20. Okay, it could be 11, it could be 8, it could be 17, doesn't matter, but a top school for aerospace engineering. Next, we talk about Pranav Dumpa, Pranav D, IBDP academics, about 38, SAD 1520. He did the University of Sydney Innovation Challenge twice, several months. In fact, I think he may have done he may have done number of months in double digits, if I remember correctly. Okay. And then you work with other students, the donor app I mentioned, integrating the donation with NGOs. And then he also did a 1-year online service program, community service program, where you actually get assigned a mentor at a small cost, but it's well worth it if you have an idea in mind that you believe needs, a program type approach where you get people to guide you for the next, 6, 12 months, right? Then that's a good option. And he got admitted to UC San Diego, again in the top 20, top 30 universities, especially for computer science. Okay, you must understand, California is full of immigrants, not only from India, China, all over the world. All of them place extreme importance on education. So you're competing against kids who have been working at this for several years. So that's why the sooner you start college prep program, that's a different program that Uwezo offers, the better for you. Okay. Now, next is Prithvi, CBSE kid, 95% academics at 1550, 3 APs. And he did quite a bit in terms of business and technology because he was aiming at the Wharton School of Business, which you can see that he did get in. And he got in with a full scholarship as well. Now, he developed an app to diagnose glaucoma, AI app, and then an app for people to donate items similar to what we talked about earlier, but a little different because he did this before this app I mentioned, right? He was a 1 or 2 years before that, right? But he integrated the app with Amazon, so I could go into this app, and then I realized that this particular NGO looking for, let's say in those days, right? Maybe not that long ago, right? So let's say if this was COVID time, it costs about, close to 3,000, and they need about, let's say 10. I can say I'm going to sign up for 3. He integrated that with Amazon. So I select that, I go to Amazon and I pick the books and I actually send them to the NGO directly. Okay, no other involvement from any people involved. Okay, so that was really good. He did start a business also because his grandfather was a farmer. So he had that thing, that passion for helping farmers. So he developed an app, and then he started a business to help the farmers find the best place to sell whatever produce they want to sell. Could be fruit, could be vegetable, could be rice, could be wheat, whatever. Okay. And as I mentioned already, he did get into UPenn, the Wharton School of Business. All right. And the final one here is Sahil, IBDP academics grade 42. He's one of those kids who did ACT, got a 35 to advanced placement courses as well. So very good, strong academically, developed an app for cancer patients. And he showed a lot of leadership skills. So he conducted a TEDx at school, led in mock trials, and lead writer for the school magazine. So now remember, by now, why are we showing you these different, I would say, profiles or blurbs, I would say, because it's not a full profile for any of the students, right? We're showing you because you'll notice that academics always are important, right? And the SAT score follows. So this is the objective criteria along with the APs and some Olympiads you also saw, right? But that's not enough, but it is mandatory, right? So different colleges may appreciate the leadership, the organizational skills, etc., in a different way. Okay, they won't come out and tell you, but Uwezo actually knows because we'll come to that more when we go to the Q&A because yesterday one of the parents had a good question and I will answer that when we come to the end of the presentation. Okay, worked with several NGOs and raised a lot of funds. Okay, and then he was rewarded with the scholarship. I'm sorry, he did not get a scholarship, but he did get into Rice University, which is again one of the top universities or colleges for computer science. Okay. All right, so that is a walk the talk. 3 slides you saw. Hopefully that helped you understand. Okay, I get it, right? So scores are important, academics are important. All the measurable criteria are mandatory to do well, but not sufficient to get into a top 30, top 40 university. That's the message I want you to leave with. Okay, now I'm a 12th grader. What do I need to do now? Well, let's see. One thing to know is November 1, not that you have to take advantage of that or use that at all in any way. You don't have to apply early, but the early application deadline is November 1. Okay. But don't lose sight of the grades. I think I've drilled that into you by now. The academics and the objective criteria are very important. When I say grades, I'm also including all the objective criteria. Okay. Now, if you haven't started the process of identifying at least 2 to 3 colleges, you should get going. Uwezo typically helps students by identifying 10 universities we apply to with varying acceptance rates for your resume. So don't forget that. We don't go look at Google and say, oh, this one says 10%, that one says 30%. We have our own, 1,200 solid resumes and applications, of students that we have helped in the last 12, 13 years or so. So we can look at that as a solid, real data versus, trying to guess, okay? Start working on the common application essay. For those of you who are not aware, common application, as it says, is common to many universities or colleges. But if you're going to apply to those colleges that make you go through the common application, you have to write one essay out of 7 prompts, must address 650 words. Okay. Now, if you want to improve your SAT score, you still have a little bit of time. For early apps, October test is still good. Okay. November 1 deadline. But Jan or later deadlines, December will still work. Okay. Make your decision. Now there is still time to do, some type of resume building in the subjective criteria area. If you feel like, oh my God, I didn't have time or I didn't have an opportunity to do something, whatever, X, Y, Z, right? There's still time. It all depends on how you balance your time, okay? But there is still time to do that. But don't try to be a jack of all trades. If you see you're missing in two or three areas, don't try and do something, in all three areas at once, because colleges will figure out. You need to tell them what you have done and when you did it. They'll quickly garner that, oh, wait a minute, this kid did it just to, fill the check the box. Don't do that. All right, what did 11 graders do? Well, obviously, better, focus on school, right? The SAT exam no later than October. That's what our recommendation is for several reasons, because the next one after that is December. And by then, if you're in IB or not, in CBSE or whatever, your 11th grade really kicks up, right? So doing it later means you balance so many things and it might become more of a challenge. So if you can, latest by October, some are doing in August as well, with Uwezo learning. See where you stand in the different prep plan in place. Now, of course, you should include all the components. Remember the circle I showed you and the arrows pointed in the various categories we went through. And then if you do want to take the AP exams, right? So May 2025 is the last opportunity. By the way, for the AP test, there is no coaching available, right? In the US, because it's part of the system or the curriculum, it is done through the school, at school, as part of the curriculum itself. But outside the US, you must do it on your own, the prep. But the exam happens only once a year in May 2025 is your last opportunity for the 11th graders. Okay, it always happens in May. A good, and hopefully by the time we get through the FAQs, you guys will have answered all your questions in your own minds. If not, you can always send a question to you. We have a number of students who are applying from various countries, including US and Canada, and a bulk of them from India. We've already started the process and in fact finished their Common App essay. Okay. So that's not meant to scare you. It just meant that you can, if you haven't started, then start now. Okay. Now, does it make a difference if I'm studying any one of these? Not that you can make an impact now because you're already in it, if you're a 12th grader or even 11th grader, right? But the good news is it doesn't matter. Okay. Doesn't matter as much as IB or Cambridge schools like to tell you or like to think. Okay. Because it's all the criteria taken together, not just any one criteria. Now, the answer is poor performance in academics? Absolutely not. Okay. You cannot do that. It doesn't work that way. Does SAT still matter? Yes, it does. Let me answer that part first before I talk about APs, Advanced Placement Tests. Now, why does SAT matter? Okay, the SAT was made optional not for international students, not for Indians, not for Chinese, who are willing to spend upwards of $60,000 every year to go to college, right, in the US. So I'm sure they figured out that they, meaning the colleges, think, right, well, you can figure out a way to get the resources to prep for college. Now, the optional SAT thing came about for several reasons, but one of the main ones was COVID, okay? Because they were targeting low-income students who go to schools in their own areas, public universities, public high schools, I'm sorry, where SAT is offered by the school for free. Now, since they were not going to school and didn't have the resources to attend online, then SAT decided that, okay, let's make it optional. But they couldn't be very biased in their opinion. So they said, okay, let's make it optional for everybody. Okay. The colleges did that, not SAT. College board can decide that, but obviously they had a role to play in that as well. Okay. Now AP's advanced placement test, we talked enough about that, but they do matter, right? Especially if you're not pursuing an IB curriculum, I would say if you're targeting the top 30, 40 universities, if you're in 12th grade, there's not much you can do. But if you're 11th grade, there is something you can do about it. It is critical. Process is not that different if you're a US citizen studying in India or an Indian citizen studying in India, because it's about the same. The only thing is the US citizen will apply through a different application, which is the same one that the US citizens in the US apply through. Okay, that's about the only change. Otherwise, they will see that you've gone to school outside the US and all the same criteria apply to you as well. Now, essays, I really shouldn't need to emphasize, but I will, because this is the only place through the essays you can articulate who you are. Because a number, like an academic score or SAT score, is just a number. We went over that before. The objective criteria, as important as they are not sufficient. So the subjective criteria, what have you done, the kind of person you become, the kind of service you provided to humanity, right? The kind of you write through the essay. It's the only place the colleges have to really understand who you are, and colleges, believe me, are looking for that. Okay, so the essays are perhaps one of the most critical good subjective criteria. Okay, IELTS, TOEFL mandatory, yes. If you're not a US citizen, absolutely, right? If you are a US citizen but studying outside the US, like in India, generally you may not need it, but we have come across a couple of universities, even though IB kids, US citizens studying in India, were required to submit IELTS or TOEFL. So what we have done is an easy test. So we've been recommending just take it instead of being in a. Sometimes schools are also giving misinformation, misleading students by saying if you're taking English HL, you don't have to do it. If you're doing this, you don't have to take it. So we're saying, why worry? A simple test, you don't have to really prepare for it. Just go do it. Now, what if I haven't decided a major? No problem. At least in the US in particular, you have 2 years to decide your major. Until then, you can take the common courses that most students take anyway, or you can try economics, business, statistics, if you try to decide between these, and then still get in, right, into college at the get-go. Okay, now deciding on a major before you start is a good idea, but not mandatory that you have to do it. Okay, now is it, this is another question we get asked a lot, is it easier or more difficult for international students to gain admission? I would say it depends. Okay, so colleges and universities are looking for diversity. So if you're an international student, obviously you're different, right? But that's not enough because many international students are. I would say the criteria still apply. Some diversity might play a role, but there are no quotas, right? But at the same time, colleges and universities are looking to have a diverse body of students. Okay. Now, this is also another thing, oftentimes parents call and say, sometimes too late when the student's already in 12th grade and say, oh, my daughter or son is a topper at school, so I'm assuming, she's going to get admission to top university. No, just go back to the criteria, what I mentioned, right? The objective versus subjective. So if she has or he has all those things, then great, right? But if not, just that one factor that, you're number one in one school in a country called India, one of hundreds of schools from which students apply to the US, it's not going to happen. Okay. All right. This is when we got into Q&A yesterday. What I'm going to do is I made a note of the questions asked and I picked the top most relevant ones, okay, not in any order. The first one was how to prep for Ivy League schools, right? So this is a tough one. And the person who asked this was 11th grader. She just got into 11th. So I'm not going to say, comment on any particular student, right? But usually for something like that, the prep must start in ninth grade. But in 11th grade also, if you've already done certain things, mostly in the subjective criteria and you've taken care of your academics and all that kind of stuff, then Uwezo can definitely help, make a college plan and then improve your chances, right? Look at where you are today and where you want to be, identify the gaps, and then help you make a proper plan. That's what we do day in, day out. Okay, that was one question. And then there was another question in terms of what about SAT in Indian colleges in India. So interestingly, for a few years now, especially the engineering colleges have been accepting or using SAT as a one of the factors in admissions. But we've also heard now, I must say, we've also heard because Uwezo is not, we never claimed to be experts at, Indian colleges or Indian universities, other than Ashoka, which is more like a US college, right? But I heard that, even in non-engineering disciplines, they are using SAT for admission. Okay. Now, there was a very obvious question saying, does Uwezo help in the admissions process? I guess, after the students saw all these things, then they said, yeah, does Uwezo help? Of course we do. Okay. And then one parent asked, okay, how do we, meaning she was talking for herself and her family, daughter, son, whatever, how do we choose the colleges? I mean, all these criteria is a little complicated, right? So I answered it by saying how Uwezo does it because there are tools out on the internet, but I would say most of them don't really work because remember, the deciding factor is the subjective criteria, which cannot be measured by even AI today, right? Maybe a year from now, 3 years from now, it may happen. But what Uwezo does is, remember I mentioned the big database we have of students we've helped over the last 12 years. We look at that and we say, okay, you're in 11th grade. This is where you are today. This is what you have done, your subjective criteria. And then we identify the gaps and make a plan. So for us, it's easier than for other people because we have real people that have gone to real colleges, that are going to real colleges. So it's easier for us, but we do take into account where you are, what have you been doing so far, and what you need to do. Okay. And the last question that was asked yesterday was medical school in the US. Now we are helping a few kids for applying to medical school in the US, but they're all US citizens. Okay, living outside the US or sometimes in the US. So it's important to know that to study medicine in the US, you have to be a US citizen or a permanent resident, okay? Because the medical colleges simply do not accept students who are not one of these, okay? So I would say if you're not one of these and you're looking to study medicine, you should not consider the US, okay? You can go to other countries, like the UK, maybe other parts of Europe or Canada, etc., where like India, you can go to med school right after high school. Okay. So those were the main questions asked yesterday. I thought it was important to share those with you. With this, we come to the end of the presentation and the remake or the recreation of the webinar from yesterday. Hopefully this was been useful or this will be useful for all of you who will view this going forward. And if you still have questions, you may send an email to info@uwezolearning.com or go to uwezolearning.com and you'll see phone numbers there or ways to get a hold of us. And then we'll be more than happy to help you. Thanks again. Hope you enjoyed this.